On a stifling late afternoon, silence cut through the backyard of a modest house in a forgotten neighborhood. A grandmother watered plants while the baby crawled through the tall grass, dodging debris. A faint moan drew the baby to a rusty barrel, hidden among the weeds. Balancing on the slippery edge, he looked inside. In the thick oil, a nearly submerged German shepherd moved, struggling to breathe. The baby touched the surface with his fingers. The grandmother screamed. Neighbors rushed. In a thin horse tied next door, tried to break free, kicking the wall. One man grabbed a hose, and what happens next? No one is ready to see. Love animal stories? Then subscribe now and don't miss a single one. Thanks for joining us. Now, back to our story. In the forgotten corner of Mill Creek, a neighborhood on the outskirts of Detroit where local news vans rarely ventured, life moved at its own reluctant pace. Occasional car horns and the distant barking of stray dogs punctuated days that otherwise blended together in quiet desperation. Once a thriving community of auto workers, Mill Creek had been slowly abandoned by industry, leaving behind weathered houses and residents who stayed either out of loyalty or lack of options. On Wisteria Lane, a row of modest homes with peeling paint and determined flower beds stood as monuments to better days. Number 37 belonged to Martha Wilson, a 65-year-old widow whose wrinkled hands had raised 3 children and now cared for her 15-month-old grandson, Joey. Her daughter, Sarah, worked double shifts at the hospital across town, leaving Martha to watch Joey during the day. It was late June, and the afternoon air hung heavy with humidity. Martha had placed Joey on a worn blanket beneath the shade of an old maple tree while she tended to her collection of potted plants. Survivors, like herself, that grew despite the odds in containers made from old paint buckets, milk jugs, and anything else she could repurpose. "Look at you," Martha murmured to a struggling tomato plant. "Thought that hailstorm would have done you in, but here you are, still growing." She adjusted her faded sun hat and glanced over at Joey, who was contentedly playing with a plastic measuring cup, scooping dirt and watching it fall. Across the street, Ray Thompson sat on his porch, nursing a can of lemonade and watching Martha garden. At 72, Ray spent most of his days observing the neighborhood from his weathered rocking chair. He'd wave occasionally at passing cars, most of which he recognized, and kept mental notes of anything unusual. Today was ordinary. Mrs. Peterson walking her ancient beagle at exactly 3:15, the Rodriguez kids riding bikes in loops at the end of the street, and Martha Wilson tending her victory garden, as she called it. "Evening, Martha," Ray called out, lifting his can in greeting. Martha straightened her back with a slight wince and waved back. "Evening, Ray. Hot enough for you?" "Too hot for June," he replied, shaking his head. "Gonna be a scorcher of a summer." Their exchange was interrupted by the rumble of an approaching truck. Both turned to see a battered blue pickup slow down near Martha's house. The driver, a young man with tattoo-covered arms and a baseball cap pulled low, seemed to be looking out for something. He drove past slowly, then accelerated around the corner. "Never seen that one before," Ray commented, his voice carrying a note of suspicion. Martha shrugged. "Probably lost, or one of those delivery drivers. They're always looking for addresses." She turned back to her plants, reaching for the watering can. It was then that she noticed the silence, a particular kind of silence that any caregiver instantly recognizes. Joey was no longer babbling or playing with his measuring cup. "Joey," Martha turned, expecting to see him napping on the blanket, but the blanket was empty. Her heart lurched. "Joey!" she called sharper now, scanning the yard. The gate to the backyard stood slightly ajar. She could have sworn she'd latched it. Martha moved faster than her arthritis usually allowed, pushing through the gate into the backyard. "Joey!" she called again, panic rising in her throat. The backyard was Martha's ongoing project. A patchwork of vegetable beds, flower patches, and collected odds and ends that she insisted would be useful someday. An old wheelbarrow with a rusted wheel, a stack of weathered lumber, scattered gardening tools. And beyond that, an area where the grass grew tall against the back fence, partially obscuring a section of yard that Martha rarely visited. It was from this direction that Martha heard it. Not Joey's voice, but something else. A faint sound, almost like a whimper or a suppressed cry. Something about it made the hair on her arms stand up. "Joey!" she called again, pushing through the tall grass. She spotted him then, his blue overalls vivid against the overgrown section of yard. But he wasn't alone. Joey was kneeling beside an old metal drum, half buried in the ground and mostly hidden by weeds. It was the kind used for storing industrial chemicals or oil. Martha had forgotten it was even there, a relic from the previous owner that she'd meant to have removed years ago. The toddler was leaning over the edge of the barrel, his small hands gripping the rim, completely focused on whatever was inside. As Martha rushed toward him, she realized Joey wasn't making any sound. It was coming from inside the barrel. "Joey, get away from there!" Martha called, her voice sharp with fear. Joey didn't turn or acknowledge her. He was utterly transfixed. Martha reached him and pulled him back, her heart pounding. Joey immediately began to struggle against her, making distressed sounds and reaching back toward the barrel. That's when she noticed his hands covered in something dark and viscous. "What in heaven's name?" Martha murmured, holding Joey. With one arm while she peered cautiously into the barrel, the smell hit her first, a powerful stench of burned oil and something organic. The barrel was filled about halfway with dark, thick liquid, but what made Martha gasp was the movement. Something was alive in there, barely visible beneath the surface of the oil. A nose, eyes, the faint outline of a head struggling to stay. Above the surface. "Oh my God," Martha whispered, stepping back and clutching Joey tighter. "Ray!" she shouted, her voice cracking with urgency. "Ray, come quick!" Joey was crying now, not out of fear but seemingly in protest at being pulled away. He kept reaching toward the barrel, his small body straining in Martha's arms. Ray appeared at the back gate moments later, moving with surprising speed for his age. "What is it? What's wrong?" he called, making his way through the overgrown path. There's something in that old barrel," Martha said, her voice shaking. "Something alive. An animal, I think." Ray approached cautiously, pulling a small flashlight from his pocket. He always carried one, a habit from his years working maintenance at the auto plant. He leaned over the edge, shining the light into the darkness of the barrel. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, his weathered face paling. "It's a dog, German Shepherd looks like. It's trapped in there." Is it still alive?" Martha asked, holding Joey away from the barrel despite his continued struggles. Ray nodded grimly. "Barely. Can't tell how long it's been in there, but it's not good. Oil's everywhere and looks like it's tangled in something down there." Joey had stopped struggling and was now making soft cooing sounds, his eyes fixed on the barrel. There was something in his expression that Martha couldn't quite understand, a focus and intensity that seemed beyond his 15 months. "We need to get help," Martha said, looking around helplessly. "We can't just leave it in there." Ray was already backing away, heading toward the gate. "I'll call animal control or the shelter." "No!" The voice came from behind them. They turned to see Ellie Parker, Martha's next-door neighbor, standing at the fence that separated their properties. A college student studying veterinary nursing, Ellie often checked in on Martha and Joey. "By the time they get here, it might be too late. We need to do something now." She was already climbing over the fence, her long braids swinging with the movement. I heard you shouting. What's going on?" As Ray explained the situation, other neighbors began to appear. The commotion had drawn attention, and in Mill Creek, anything out of the ordinary was cause for gathering. Mike and Teresa Ramirez from across the street, old Mrs. Henderson from 2 doors down, the Davidson brothers from the house on the corner. Soon, a small crowd had formed around the barrel, their faces a mixture of horror and concern as they peered at the struggling animal. Someone had brought a ladder to provide better access. Another neighbor arrived with towels and blankets. "We need to get it out," Ellie insisted, her training kicking in. "It's drowning in that oil." "How?" Ray asked. "That stuff is toxic, and we don't know if the dog is injured or aggressive." While the adults debated, Joey had quieted completely. He sat on the ground where Martha had placed him, his eyes never leaving the barrel. His small hand reached out, opening and closing as if trying to grasp something only he could see. And as the afternoon sun began to sink toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the forgotten corner of Martha Wilson's backyard, no one noticed the faint, almost imperceptible connection forming between a toddler and a dying dog, a connection that would soon change everything for the residents of Wisteria Lane. The crowd around the oil barrel grew as word spread through the neighborhood. Martha still held Joey, who had stopped struggling but remained intensely focused on the barrel, occasionally making small sounds as if trying to communicate with whatever was inside. "Has anyone called animal control?" asked Teresa Ramirez, a kindergarten teacher whose compassion extended well beyond her classroom. "I tried," Ray replied, pocketing his phone. "Got their answering service, said they're at capacity and won't send anyone out until tomorrow morning." A collective murmur of disapproval rippled through the group. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across Martha's backyard. "Tomorrow will be too late," Ellie said firmly, rolling up the sleeves of her university sweatshirt. "That dog won't make it through the night." Mike Ramirez, Teresa's husband and a former construction worker now on disability after a back injury, stepped forward. "I've got some equipment in my garage. Heavy gloves, a tarp. Maybe we can rig something up." "I have a pump we could use to get some of that oil out," offered Frank Davidson, the older of the 2 brothers who ran the neighborhood hardware store. His younger brother, Pete, was already on his phone, searching for information about oil contamination and animal rescue. Martha felt a complex mix of emotions as she watched her neighbors mobilize. In the 15 years she'd lived on Wisteria Lane, she'd never seen them come together like this. They exchanged pleasantries, borrowed cups of sugar, and waved from their porches, but there had always been an unspoken distance between them, invisible boundaries created by differences in background, politics, and circumstances. Yet here they were, in her neglected backyard, unified by the silent struggle happening inside that rusted barrel. "I can hold Joey while you help," offered Mrs. Henderson, reaching for the toddler. But as Martha tried to hand him over, Joey clung to her with surprising strength, his eyes never leaving the barrel. "It's okay," Martha said, adjusting him on her hip. "He seems determined to stay and watch." Ellie had cautiously approached the barrel again, with Ray holding the flashlight for her. "The dog is definitely tangled in something," she reported. "Looks like plastic bags and maybe some wires. It can barely keep its nose above the surface." "How did it even get in there?" Mrs. Henderson wondered aloud, her voice carrying the weight of suspicion that came naturally to someone who'd lived through difficult times in a challenging neighborhood. Ray shook his head. "That barrel's been sitting here for years. No way that dog climbed in by itself." The implication hung in the air, uncomfortable and unspoken. Someone had done this deliberately. Martha felt a chill despite the warm evening. She thought of the blue pickup truck that had driven by earlier, slowing near her house. Mike returned, carrying a collection of tools and protective gear. Okay, here's what I'm thinking. We use Frank's pump to remove some of the oil, then try to get the dog out with these. He held up a pair of heavy-duty tongs used for handling large pieces of wood. We'll need to be careful, Ellie cautioned. The dog is probably terrified and might bite out of fear. Plus, we don't know what injuries it has. As they discussed options, Joey suddenly began to fuss in Martha's arms, reaching toward the barrel with renewed urgency. His small face was scrunched in determination, and he made a sound that was almost like a word. "What is it, sweetie?" Martha asked, trying to comfort him. To everyone's surprise, Joey pointed directly at the barrel and said, clear as day, "Help." That group fell silent. Joey was still learning to talk, with a vocabulary of only a few consistent words. Help had not been one of them. Martha felt goosebumps rise on her arms. "He's never said that before," she whispered, looking at her grandson, with a mixture of awe and unease. The moment was broken by the sound of a car pulling up in front of the house. Moments later, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 30s appeared at the back gate. He wore faded jeans and a plaid shirt, and his dark hair was flecked with early gray. "I heard there's an animal emergency," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. "I'm Ben Harmon. I run the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center over in Oakfield." Ellie's face lit up with recognition. "Dr. Harmon, I attended your guest lecture at Michigan State last semester on emergency field treatment for wildlife." Ben nodded, offering a brief smile. "Call me Ben. And you are?" "Ellie Parker. I'm in the vet nursing program." "Good to have you here, Ellie. Now, what's the situation?" As the group quickly explained, Ben's expression grew serious. He approached the barrel cautiously, using his own high-powered flashlight to assess the situation. "German Shepherd, adult male," he confirmed. "Severely contaminated with what looks like used motor oil, multiple entanglements." He straightened up, addressing the group. "This is deliberate animal abuse. The dog didn't wander in here by accident." Martha felt Joey tense in her arms, as if the child somehow understood the gravity of Ben's words. "Can you save it?" Teresa asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Ben didn't offer false reassurance. "It's touch and go, but we've got to try." He turned to Mike. "That pump idea is good. Let's start there. We need to lower the oil level without causing the dog to panic." With Ben directing the effort, the neighbors formed an efficient rescue team. Frank connected his pump to a long hose, carefully positioning it to remove oil without disturbing the dog. Pete had found several 5-gallon buckets to collect the toxic liquid. Teresa and Mrs. Henderson cleared a space on Martha's back porch where they could work once the dog was out. Ray rigged up some outdoor lights, illuminating the scene as darkness fell. As they worked, Martha noticed something strange. Joey had become completely calm in her arms, watching the proceedings with an intense focus that seemed beyond his years. Occasionally, he would make soft sounds toward the barrel, and Martha could hardly believe it. The dog seemed to respond, its head turning slightly toward the sound of Joey's voice. "Look at that," she whispered to Teresa, who had come to stand beside her. "It's like they're communicating somehow." Teresa, who had worked with young children for over 20 years, nodded thoughtfully. "Children have instincts we lose as adults, especially for creatures in distress." The oil level had dropped considerably, revealing more of the dog's condition. The sight was heart-wrenching. The once proud German Shepherd was now a pitiful figure, its fur matted and black with oil, its body thin from neglect. Plastic bags, wire, and even what looked like an old belt were wrapped around its legs and torso, explaining why it couldn't escape the barrel. "Ready for extraction," Ben announced, pulling on heavy-duty gloves. "Ellie, I'll need your help. Everyone else stand back but be ready to assist." Martha moved to the porch steps, settling Joey on her lap where they could watch. She expected him to struggle, to try to get closer to the action. But he remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the barrel with an intensity that was almost unsettling. The extraction was painstaking. Ben and Ellie worked methodically, first securing the dog's muzzle with a makeshift restraint to prevent bites born of panic or pain. Then, inch by careful inch, they began to free the animal from its prison of oil and debris. "The plastic is wrapped tight around the back legs," Ben reported, his voice strained with effort. "Someone tied it deliberately." A collective murmur of disgust passed through the group. Who would do such a thing? When they finally lifted the dog from the barrel, an audible gasp rose from the onlookers. The animal was in worse condition than anyone had imagined. Its body was emaciated, ribs clearly visible even through the coating of oil. Old scars marked its flanks, speaking of past abuse. Yet despite everything, its eyes were alert, darting around at the circle of humans. "He's still fighting," Ben said with grudging admiration as they placed the dog on the tarp Teresa had prepared. "That's a good sign." As soon as the dog was visible, Joey began to squirm in Martha's lap, reaching toward the animal with renewed urgency. "No, Joey," Martha said firmly, holding him back. "The doggy is very sick. We have to let the doctor help him." But Joey was insistent, his small face determined as he pointed at the dog and repeated, "Help! Help!" Ben looked up from where he was beginning to clean the oil from the dog's face. He studied Joey for a moment, then glanced at Martha. "How long has your grandson been interested in the dog?" "He found it," Martha explained. "I was gardening and he wandered off. When I found him, he was leaning over the barrel, like he knew something was in there." Ben's expression shifted, a curious light entering his eyes. "Bring him closer," he said after a moment. "Not too close, but let him see." Martha hesitated, her protective instincts flaring. "Is it safe?" "I've muzzled the dog temporarily and he's too weak to move much. Just keep Joey at a safe distance." Martha cautiously approached, holding Joey securely. As they got closer, the dog's eyes fixed on the child. There was no aggression in its gaze, only a strange recognition. Joey reached out a hand, not quite touching the dog, but gesturing toward it. "Help," he said again, with perfect clarity. The dog made a soft sound, not a whimper or a growl, but something in between. A sound of acknowledgement. "Well, I'll be damned," Ray muttered from behind them. Ben was watching the interaction with intense interest. "I've seen animals respond to children before, but this is different." He looked up at the circle of neighbors, gathered around the tarp. "This dog trusts your grandson. Somehow he knows the child is trying to help him." As Ben and Ellie continued their emergency treatment, cleaning the worst of the oil and carefully cutting away the entanglements, Joey remained close by, sitting quietly in Martha's lap. The neighbors worked together, fetching water, holding lights, disposing of contaminated materials, and offering encouragement. And as the night deepened around them, the residents of Wisteria Lane found themselves united in a way they had never been before, drawn together by the silent bond between a toddler and a dog who had both, in their own ways, crossed unexpected boundaries to find each other. The kitchen clock read 11:37 p.m. when Sarah Wilson finally pulled into her mother's driveway, exhausted from her double shift at Detroit Memorial. She expected to find the house dark and quiet, with Martha and Joey long asleep. Instead, she was greeted by the glow of lights and the murmur of voices coming from the backyard. Confused and slightly alarmed, Sarah hurried through the side gate. The scene that greeted her stopped her in her tracks. Her mother's usually quiet backyard had been transformed into what looked like a field hospital. Portable lights illuminated a tarp-covered area where several people were hunched over what appeared to be an animal. Others were moving about with purpose, carrying buckets and supplies. "Mom," Sarah called, spotting Martha sitting on the porch steps with Joey asleep in her arms. Martha looked up, relief washing over her face. "Oh, Sarah, thank goodness you're here. We've had quite an evening." Sarah approached, taking in the bizarre scene. "What's going on? What is all this?" Before Martha could answer, a tall man she didn't recognize straightened up from the group working on the tarp. "You must be Sarah," he said, wiping his hands on a towel. "I'm Ben Harmon. Your son made quite a discovery today." As Ben explained the situation, Sarah's expression cycled through shock, horror, and disbelief. She knelt beside her sleeping son, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. Joey found the dog? But how did he even know it was there? "That's what we've all been wondering," Martha admitted. "He just knew somehow, wandered straight to it." Sarah studied her son's peaceful face. Joey had always been unusually perceptive, noticing things adults missed, responding to moods and atmospheres with uncanny awareness. But this was different. "How's the dog doing?" she asked, turning toward the makeshift treatment area. "Better than expected," Ben replied. "He's severely malnourished and has multiple injuries, but no broken bones from what I can tell. The oil contamination is our biggest concern right now." Sarah, who worked as a pediatric nurse, found herself instinctively moving toward the animal. "Can I help?" Ben nodded, appreciating her professional demeanor. Another pair of trained hands would be welcome. Sarah gently transferred Joey to Martha's arms and joined Ben and Ellie at the top. The dog lay still, breathing shallowly, its body now partially cleaned of oil. Up close, Sarah could see the extent of its condition. The prominent ribs, the old scars beneath the matted fur, the raw marks where restraints had been. "Someone did this deliberately," she whispered, the reality of the situation sinking in. "Yes," Ben confirmed grimly. "And from the look of these older injuries, it wasn't the first time this dog has been abused." Sarah felt a surge of anger. In her years of nursing, she'd seen the aftermath of human cruelty too many times, but it never got easier to witness. "We've managed to stabilize him for now," Ellie explained, showing Sarah the makeshift IV they'd rigged up with supplies Ben had brought. "But he needs proper veterinary care as soon as possible." "I've called a colleague at the emergency veterinary hospital in Oakfield," Ben added. "They're preparing for our arrival. The challenge now is transport." Ray, who had been helping with the cleanup, stepped forward. "I've lined the back of my station wagon with tarps and blankets. It's not pretty, but it'll get him there." "I'm coming too," Ellie said firmly. "I can monitor him during transport." "And I'd like to come," Sarah added, surprising herself. She had an early shift tomorrow, but something about this situation, about the connection between her son and this suffering animal, compelled her to see it through. While they prepared for transport, Martha carried Joey inside to put him properly to bed. The toddler stirred briefly, his eyes opening to find his mother. "Mama," he murmured sleepily, then added with perfect clarity, "Dog better." Sarah and Martha exchanged looks of astonishment. Joey's language skills were still developing. Two-word combinations were rare, and these particular words weren't in his usual vocabulary. "Yes, sweetie," Sarah said, touching his cheek gently. "We're helping the dog get better." Joey nodded, as if this was exactly what he expected, then drifted back to sleep. As Martha settled Joey in his crib, Sarah rejoined the group outside. The neighbors had formed an efficient assembly line, passing supplies and following Ben's instructions with remarkable coordination. It struck Sarah how unlikely this collaboration would have seemed just hours ago. The residents of Wisteria Lane were a diverse group who normally kept to themselves. Ray Thompson, the retired auto worker whose conservative views were well known from his lawn signs. The Davidson brothers, whose hardware store had barely survived the economic downturn. Teresa Ramirez, who organized the neighborhood's only multicultural event each year, often with limited participation. Mrs. Henderson, whose suspicion of newcomers was legendary. Yet here they were, working together with singular purpose, their usual divisions forgotten. As they carefully loaded the German Shepherd into Ray's station wagon, Teresa approached Sarah. "We've been taking turns keeping watch," she explained, in case whoever did this comes back. Sarah hadn't considered that possibility. "You think they might return?" Teresa's expression darkened. "A blue pickup drove by twice earlier. Ray says he saw it this afternoon too, driving slowly near your mother's house." "I'll call the police," Sarah said immediately. "Already did," Mike Ramirez interjected. "They took a report but said without evidence of who dumped the dog, there's not much they can do. They'll send a patrol car by a few times tonight." The knowledge that someone capable of such cruelty might be watching them sent a chill through Sarah. She glanced toward her mother's house, thinking of Joey sleeping peacefully inside. "Don't worry," Frank Davidson said, noticing her concern. "Pete and I are going to take shifts keeping an eye on the place tonight. No one's getting near your boy." Sarah felt a rush of gratitude toward these neighbors she barely knew. "Thank you," she said simply. Ben closed the station wagon's rear door carefully. "We should go now. The sooner we get him to the hospital, the better his chances." As Ray, Ben, Ellie, and Sarah prepared to leave, Martha emerged from the house. "Joey's fast asleep," she reported. "Didn't even stir when I changed him." "Call me if anything happens," Sarah instructed, hugging her mother. "Anything at all." "We'll be fine," Martha assured her, though her eyes betrayed her unease. "You just make sure that dog pulls through for Joey's sake." The drive to the emergency veterinary hospital took 30 minutes, during which the dog remained eerily still, its breathing shallow but stable. Sarah sat in the back beside Ellie, helping to monitor the animal's condition and hold the makeshift EV in place over the bumpy roads. "How did you end up at my mother's house tonight?" Sarah asked Ben, curious about the veterinarian's timely appearance. "Ellie called me," Ben explained. "We met at a lecture I gave at Michigan State. When she described the situation, I knew I needed to come right away." "Ben's not just a vet," Ellie added with obvious admiration. "He runs the largest wildlife rehabilitation center in the state. He's the best at treating animals in crisis situations." Ben shrugged off the praise. "I specialize in helping animals others have given up on. When Ellie mentioned a dog trapped in oil, well, it sounded like one of mine." Something in his tone caught Sarah's attention. "One of yours?" Ben was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the road ahead. "I've been tracking cases of animal abuse in the Detroit metro area for the past year. There's been a pattern: pets disappearing, then turning up injured or abandoned in industrial areas." "You think this is connected?" Sarah asked, a new dread settling in her stomach. "It's too early to say, but the method, the oil barrel, the deliberate restraints, it has similarities to other cases I've documented." The implications hung heavy in the air as they pulled into the parking lot of the Oakfield Emergency Veterinary Hospital. A team was waiting for them with a gurney, alerted by Ben's earlier call. The transfer happened quickly. Sarah watched as the German Shepherd disappeared through the hospital doors, carried by efficient hands that would now take over the fight for its life. She felt a strange emptiness, as if she'd been disconnected from something important. "You should go home, get some rest," Ben suggested, noting her exhaustion. "There's nothing more we can do tonight." "What about you?" Sarah asked. "I'm staying. I want to assist with the treatment." He handed her a business card. "My cell number's on there. Call me tomorrow and I'll update you on his condition." Sarah studied the card. Benjamin Harmon, DVM, Wildlife Rehabilitation and Veterinary Services. "Thank you," she said, looking up at him, "for everything you did tonight." Ben's tired eyes softened slightly. "Thank your son. If Joey hadn't found that dog when he did, we wouldn't be having this conversation." On the drive back to Mill Creek, with Ray and Ellie talking quietly in the front seat, Sarah found herself thinking about the strange connection between her son and the abandoned dog. Joey had always been sensitive, sometimes eerily so, but this was different. It was as if he had been called to that specific spot, drawn by some invisible thread of understanding that adults couldn't perceive. The digital clock on Ray's dashboard read 2:17 a.m. when they pulled up in front of Martha's house. The neighborhood was silent now, the earlier activity replaced by an uneasy quiet. Pete Davidson sat on Martha's front porch, a thermos of coffee beside him, keeping his promised vigil. "All quiet?" Ray asked as they approached. Pete nodded. "Not even a stray cat. Frank's around back, checking the perimeter every half hour." Sarah thanked them again, humbled by their dedication. These people had been strangers yesterday, familiar faces she'd wave to but rarely speak with. Now they were protectors, united by an unexpected chain of events set in motion by her 15-month-old son. Inside, Sarah found Martha dozing in the rocking chair beside Joey's crib. The toddler was sleeping peacefully, one small hand curled around the ear of his favorite stuffed elephant. Sarah touched her mother's shoulder gently. "Mom, go to bed. I'll stay with him." Martha stirred, blinking up at her daughter. "How's the dog?" "At the hospital. They're doing everything they can." Martha nodded, rising stiffly from the chair. "There's something special about that animal," she said quietly. "The way Joey responded to it. I've never seen anything like it." Sarah settled into the rocking chair her mother had vacated, watching her son's peaceful breathing. "I know, it's like they recognized each other somehow." Martha paused at the door. "Ray thinks someone in the neighborhood might be involved, that whoever put that dog in the barrel might live nearby." The thought had occurred to Sarah too. "Why do you say that?" "The barrel has been in our yard for years, hidden in those weeds. Someone would have to know it was there, and the blue truck that was driving by. It's like they were checking if their handiwork had been discovered." Sarah felt that chill again. "We should tell the police." Ray already did. "But without proof." Martha shrugged helplessly. "Anyway, the Davidson brothers have offered to install security lights tomorrow. And Mike's bringing over a camera system he has from when his tools kept getting stolen." Again, Sarah was struck by the transformation in their neighbors. Yesterday, they had lived in adjacent houses, but separate worlds. Today, they had become a community in the truest sense. As Martha left for her own bed, Sarah rocked gently in the chair, her eyes moving between her sleeping son and the window that faced the backyard, where everything had changed. Out there, in the darkness, someone had committed an act of terrible cruelty, and somehow her innocent son had been the instrument of mercy that countered it. What connected them? The child, the dog, the hidden barrel, the watching stranger. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were only beginning to understand. The threads that bound them all together, threads that stretched back into the past and forward into an uncertain future. Morning broke over Wisteria Lane with unusual activity. By 7 a.m., Mike Ramirez was already on Martha's roof, installing security lights with Frank Davidson steadying the ladder below. Pete Davidson and Ray Thompson were setting up wireless cameras at strategic points around the property. Teresa had arrived with breakfast burritos for everyone, and Mrs. Henderson was watching Joey in the living room so Martha could shower and prepare for the day. Sarah, who had called in to take a personal day from the hospital, stood in the kitchen, watching the neighborhood mobilize through the window while she waited for her coffee to brew. "I've never seen anything like this," Martha commented, joining her daughter. 20 years in this neighborhood, And I barely knew these people's favorite colors. Now they're installing security systems and taking breakfast orders. Sarah nodded, still processing the transformation. Have you heard anything from Ben? Not yet. But Ellie stopped by at dawn. Said she'd been at the veterinary hospital all night, and the dog was still in critical condition. They're doing everything they can. Joey's voice came from the living room, his excited babble punctuated by Mrs. Henderson's gentle responses. Sarah smiled, despite her exhaustion. At 15 months, Joey was still discovering his voice, stringing together sounds that sometimes formed words, but more often remained his own private language. Except for yesterday, when he had spoken with startling clarity about the dog. Do you think he'll remember any of this? Sarah asked, nodding toward her son. He's so young. Martha considered the question. I think some experiences leave marks on us, no matter our age. Joey might not remember the details, but something about that connection. It might stay with him. Sarah's phone rang, cutting off their conversation. The screen showed an unfamiliar number. Hello? Sarah, it's Ben Harmon. His voice sounded rough with exhaustion. I wanted to update you on the dog. Sarah's heart skipped. How is he? Stable, which is more than I expected. We've cleaned most of the oil from his coat and treated him for chemical burns. He's severely malnourished and dehydrated, but responding well to treatment. The most interesting development is what we found when we scanned him for a microchip. He has one, Sarah asked, surprised. Yes, his name is Ranger. He was registered to a family in Auburn Hills, but when we contacted them, they said he'd been missing for over 3 months. They'd given up hope of finding him. Sarah felt a surge of emotion. Not just a stray or abandoned dog, but a beloved pet stolen from his family. Have they been notified? Are they coming to get him? There was a pause on the line. That's the complicated part. The family has since moved to Florida. They were devastated to hear what happened to Ranger, but they've already adopted another dog, and they're not in a position to take him back, especially given his condition and the potential for long-term health issues. So what happens to him now? Once he's stabilized, he'll go to a rescue organization for rehabilitation and eventual adoption. But Ben hesitated. Sarah, there's something else you should know. The police are taking this case more seriously now. With the documented theft and clear evidence of abuse, they've opened a criminal investigation. They'll want to speak with you and your mother, and possibly Joey, though I explained he's too young to provide a statement. Sarah's mind raced. A criminal investigation meant the person responsible might be identified and might know they were being investigated. Do they have any leads? Not yet. But they're canvassing the neighborhood today, showing pictures of Ranger from when he was reported missing. Someone might have seen something. After ending the call, Sarah relayed the information to Martha, who received it with a mix of relief and concern. Ranger, Martha repeated, testing the name. Poor thing. At least now we know he was loved once. Joey appeared in the kitchen, doorway, holding Mrs. Henderson's hand, his face lit up at the sight of his mother. Mama, dog! Sarah knelt down to his level, amazed again at his focus on the animal. The dog is at the doctor's, sweetie. He's getting better. Joey nodded solemnly, as if this was exactly what he'd expected to hear. Dog come home? Sarah and Martha exchanged glances. We don't know yet, honey, Sarah said carefully. The dog, his name is Ranger. He might need to find a new home. Joey frowned, processing this information. Then, with perfect clarity, he stated, Ranger, come here. Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows shot up. Well, I never, she murmured. Speaking in full sentences. Is he? Only about the dog, Martha explained. It's the strangest thing. Sarah was saved from further explanation by a knock at the door. Two police officers stood on the porch, notebooks in hand. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm Officer Chen, and this is Officer Barrett. We'd like to ask you a few questions about the dog found on your property." The officers were professional and thorough, taking detailed statements from Sarah and Martha about the discovery of the dog and the subsequent rescue. They were particularly interested in the blue pickup truck that had been seen driving slowly past the house. "We've had reports of similar vehicles in connection with other animal disappearances," Officer Chen explained. "Usually older model blue or black pickups, sometimes with a cap over the bed." "Do you think it's one person?" Sarah asked. Officer Barrett shook his head. "We believe it's a group. There's been a pattern of pet thefts across several counties over the past year. Dogs primarily, especially purebreds, or those that could be mistaken for certain breeds." "But why?" Martha asked, horrified. "Ransom?" "Sometimes. Other times it's for illegal fighting operations. They steal pets to use as bait dogs to train. They're fighters." Seeing their expressions, he added, "I'm sorry to be blunt, but you should know what we're dealing with." "And the oil barrel," Sarah pressed. "How does that fit in?" The officers exchanged glances. "We're not sure yet," Officer Chen admitted. "It could be a disposal method, when animals are no longer useful to them. Or intimidation," Officer Barrett finished, "sending a message to someone in the neighborhood." The implication hung heavy in the air. Someone nearby might be connected to these people, might even be part of their operation. After the police left, promising increased patrols and requesting they report any suspicious vehicles, Sarah found herself standing in the backyard, staring at the now empty oil barrel. Mike and Frank had cordoned it off with yellow tape, preserving it as evidence. "We should get rid of that thing as soon as the police say it's okay," Martha said, joining her. "I never want to see it again." Sarah nodded absently, her mind elsewhere. "Mom, what do you think Joey meant when he said, 'Ranger, come here'? He can't possibly understand the concept of adoption or pet ownership." Martha watched as Joey played, with his blocks on a blanket under the maple tree, carefully supervised by Teresa. "I don't know, but I've been thinking about something all morning. Do you remember Mr. Collins and his dog? From when you were little?" Sarah frowned, searching her memory. Vaguely, he lived down the street, had some kind of big dog. A German Shepherd," Martha confirmed, "named Rex. You were fascinated with that dog. Every time we passed Mr. Collins's house, you'd stop and talk to Rex through the fence. One day, you told me Rex was sad because his foot hurt. I thought you were just playing pretend. But the next day, Mr. Collins was at the vet with Rex. He had a thorn embedded deep in his paw, infected. No one could see it from the outside." Sarah stared at her mother. "Are you saying I had some kind of psychic connection with the dog?" Martha shrugged. "I'm saying sometimes children perceive things adults can't, or won't. Maybe it's because they haven't learned to ignore the subtle signals yet. Whatever it is, it seems like Joey has inherited that sensitivity from you." The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Neighbors continued to come and go, bringing food, offering help, or just checking in. The police returned to examine the barrel more thoroughly, taking samples and photographs. Sarah received regular updates from Ben, who reported that Ranger was showing small improvements hour by hour. By evening, the security lights and cameras were installed, transforming Martha's modest home into what Ray jokingly called Fort Wilson. The neighbors gathered in the living room for an impromptu meeting to discuss neighborhood safety measures in light of the police investigation. "We should organize a watch rotation," Mike suggested. "Make sure someone's keeping an eye out at all times, and share contact information added Teresa. Create a phone tree so we can alert each other quickly if something happens. As they debated various security strategies, Sarah slipped out to the front porch for a moment of quiet. The summer evening was settling over Wisteria Lane, fireflies beginning their nightly dance above the lawns. It was hard to reconcile the peaceful scene with the darkness they'd uncovered. A car pulled up in front of the house, a battered green Subaru that Sarah recognized as Ben's. He emerged looking exhausted but satisfied, carrying a medical bag. "I thought you'd be at the hospital with Ranger," Sarah said as he approached. "The critical period has passed. He's stable enough that I could leave him with the staff for a few hours." Ben climbed the porch steps, setting his bag down. "Actually, I'm here partly on official business. The police asked me to check the barrel again, see if I can determine how long Ranger was in there." Sarah nodded toward the back gate. "It's all taped off, but they said you'd be coming." Ben hesitated. "How's Joey?" "Tired. It's been an overwhelming day for everyone. He keeps asking about Ranger, though. That connection between them, it's remarkable. In my years of veterinary work, I've seen all kinds of animal-human bonds, but nothing quite like this." Sarah was about to respond when a sound from inside the house caught her attention. Joey's voice, raised in excitement. She hurried back. Inside, Ben following. In the living room, Joey was standing in the middle of the impromptu neighborhood meeting, pointing at the television with unusual animation. Look, the evening news was on, showing footage of police officers investigating a property. The caption read, "Breaking, police raid suspected dogfighting operation in Wayne County." Ray quickly turned up the volume. Following an anonymous tip, police raided this property earlier today, where they discovered evidence of an illegal dog-fighting ring. Multiple animals were rescued, many showing signs of severe abuse. 3 suspects have been taken into custody, and authorities believe this operation may be connected to a string of pet thefts across the Metro Detroit area. The report continued, showing blurred footage of dogs being carried out on stretchers and loaded into animal control vehicles. Joey watched with intense focus, occasionally nodding as if confirming something he already knew. "Anonymous tip," Ray muttered. "Wonder who finally talked." Ben's expression had turned grim. "I know that property. It's been on our radar at the Wildlife Center for months. We've found injured animals dumped in the woods nearby, but could never prove a connection." The news shifted to an interview with a police sergeant. "We believe this is just one cell of a larger network operating throughout Michigan. We're asking the public to remain vigilant and report any suspicious activity, especially unusual vehicles seen in residential neighborhoods where pets might be targeted." As if on cue, the image changed to show a blue pickup truck being towed from the raided property. A collective gasp went through the room. Martha gripped Sarah's arm. "That's it? That's the truck that was driving by yesterday?" The reporter continued. "Police are particularly interested in this blue Ford pickup, which matches descriptions given by witnesses in several pet theft cases. Authorities are asking anyone who has seen this vehicle to contact the tip line displayed on your screen." Joey, who had been watching silently, suddenly pointed at the image of the truck and said clearly, "Bad man." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to the toddler. "Joey." Sarah knelt beside her son. "What do you mean?" "Sweetie," Joey's face scrunched in concentration. "Bad man, take dogs." Sarah felt a chill run through her. "Did you see the bad man take Ranger?" Joey nodded solemnly. "In barrel, crying." The adults exchanged shocked glances. Joey couldn't possibly have witnessed Ranger being put in the barrel. It had happened before they found him. Yet he spoke with such certainty. Ben moved closer, kneeling to Joey's level. "Joey, when did you see the bad man?" Joey pointed vaguely toward the window. "Blue car, watching." Yesterday? Ben pressed gently. When the blue truck drove by? Joey nodded, again then added, and before, when sleeping. Sarah frowned. When sleeping? You mean you dreamed about the bad man? Joey's expression suggested this was a difficult concept to explain with his limited vocabulary. Instead, he made a gesture with his hands, a circular motion, followed by a pushing down movement. I think, Martha said slowly, he's trying to say he saw someone put Ranger in the barrel. But that's impossible, Ray objected. The dog was already in there when Joey found him. Unless... Ben looked thoughtful. Unless Joey is describing something he sensed rather than something he saw with his eyes. Children his age don't distinguish clearly between different types of perception. Sarah remembered what Martha had told her earlier about her own childhood experience with Mr. Collins's dog. Was it possible that Joey had somehow perceived Ranger's trauma, had formed a connection with the dog that transcended normal understanding? Whatever the case, Mike said practically, we should call the police tip line. Tell them about the blue truck we saw here yesterday. As Ray made the call, Sarah watched Joey, who had lost interest in the television and was now playing contentedly with his blocks. To look at him, you'd never guess he had been at the center of such extraordinary events. Ben touched Sarah's shoulder gently. I should check the barrel before it gets dark. Would you mind showing me the way? In the backyard, now illuminated by the newly installed security lights, Ben examined the oil barrel carefully, taking samples and measurements. Sarah stood nearby, arms crossed against the evening chill. The police think whoever did this might have connections in the neighborhood, she said quietly. That's why they chose my mother's yard. They knew the barrel was here, hidden in the weeds. Ben straightened up, his expression troubled. It's possible. Or they might have been driving around looking for disposal sites and spotted this one. By chance. Do you think they'll come back now that the police have raided their operation? Hard to say. These networks can be extensive. If some of them avoided the raid, he left the implication hanging. Sarah looked toward the house, where warm light spilled from the windows, and the voices of neighbors, now friends, created a buffer against the darkness. I'm scared, Ben. Not just of these people, but of what Joey seems to know to understand. It's not normal for a child his age. Ben was quiet for a moment. In my work, I've seen animals communicate with each other in ways science can't fully explain. Awareness that extends beyond physical senses. Why couldn't humans, especially young humans, with minds not yet rigid with preconceptions, share some of that capacity? You believe Joey and Ranger have some kind of psychic bond? I believe they connected on a level we don't yet understand, and I believe that connection might have saved Ranger's life. Ben closed his medical bag. Which reminds me, I have something to ask you. Inside, the impromptu neighborhood meeting had evolved into an equally impromptu dinner party. Teresa and Mrs. Henderson had taken over the kitchen, cooking up a feast from the various dishes neighbors had brought throughout the day. The Davidson brothers were setting up a system to share the security camera feeds with everyone involved in the watch rotation. Mike and Ray were on the phone with other residents, expanding the safety network beyond Wisteria Lane. And at the center of it all was Joey, blissfully unaware of his pivotal role, now fast asleep on the living room couch with his favorite stuffed elephant clutched in one hand. Sarah watched from the doorway, struck by how quickly crisis had forged community. From isolation, these people who had lived side by side for years without truly seeing each other were now united, their differences set aside in service of a common purpose. It's remarkable, isn't it? Martha said softly, joining her. All because Joey found that dog. Sarah nodded, remembering Ben's parting words before he left to return to the veterinary hospital. Ranger will need a foster home during his recovery, someone who can give him specialized care and understand his unique needs. Someone he already trusts. The suggestion had been implicit but clear, and as Sarah looked at her sleeping son, she wondered what new changes awaited them all when Ranger finally came home. 3 weeks later, Wisteria Lane was transformed. The Neighborhood Watch program had expanded to cover the entire Mill Creek area with coordinated patrols and a sophisticated communication system. Security lights adorned most houses, and pet watch signs stood prominently in front yards, warning would-be thieves that this community was vigilant and united. The police investigation had progressed rapidly after the initial raid. 2 more arrests had been made, including a man driving a blue Ford pickup that matched the one seen on Wisteria Lane. Evidence found in the vehicle linked him directly to Ranger's case, bringing a measure of closure to the neighborhood. But the most dramatic transformation had occurred at 37 Wisteria Lane itself. Sarah stood on the front porch, watching as Ben's green Subaru pulled into the driveway. Today was the day they had all been waiting for. After 3 weeks of intensive treatment, Ranger was finally coming home. Home. The word still felt strange to Sarah. She had never planned to adopt a dog, especially not one with Ranger's complex medical needs. But somehow the decision had made itself, guided by Joey's unwavering certainty and supported by the entire neighborhood. Martha emerged from the house, holding Joey's hand. The toddler was practically vibrating with excitement, bouncing on his toes as Ben carefully opened the rear door of his car. "Remember what we talked about?" Sarah reminded her son gently. "Ranger is still recovering. We need to be very gentle and calm around him." Joey nodded solemnly. Ranger hurt, Joey careful. Sarah marveled again at her son's verbal development over the past weeks. The pediatrician had been astonished at his last checkup, noting that Joey was now speaking at the level of a child nearly twice his age, at least when the subject was Ranger. It was as if the connection with the dog had accelerated something in Joey's development, unlocking capacities that had been dormant. Ben appeared from behind the car, supporting a much-changed Ranger. The German Shepherd's coat, now free of oil and properly groomed, gleamed in the sunlight. He was still thin but no longer emaciated, and he moved with a cautious dignity that hinted at his true nature beneath the trauma. Most striking were his eyes, alert, intelligent, and focused immediately on Joey as soon as he came into view. Ben led Ranger slowly up the front walk, allowing the dog to set the pace. Ranger wore a special harness that supported his still healing body and provided handles for Ben to guide him. When they reached the bottom of the porch steps, Ben stopped, giving Ranger time to assess the situation. Joey remained perfectly still on the porch, his small face a picture of concentrated patience. He made no move toward the dog, no sound to call him. He simply waited, as if understanding instinctively what Ranger needed. Sarah held her breath. The veterinary staff had reported that Ranger, despite his progress, remained wary around most people, a natural response to the abuse he had suffered. Only with Ben and, inexplicably, when shown photos of Joey, did he seem to relax fully. Ranger studied Joey for a long moment. Then, with a deliberate slowness that spoke of both caution and purpose, he began to climb the porch steps, one at a time, Ben supporting him gently. When he reached the top, Ranger stopped, now at eye level with Joey. The child and the dog regarded each other in silence, two souls connected by something beyond understanding. Then Joey spoke, his voice soft and clear. "Home now, Ranger." The German Shepherd's tail gave a single, tentative wag, then another. And then, as if a decision had been made, Ranger leaned forward and gently, so gently, touched his nose to Joey's outstretched hand. Martha wiped tears from her eyes. Sarah felt her own throat tighten with emotion. Ben, the professional, struggled to maintain his composure. "Well," he said, his voice slightly hoarse, "I'd say that's a successful homecoming." The rest of the morning was spent settling Ranger into his new environment. Ben had worked with Sarah and Martha over the past weeks to prepare the house, creating safe spaces for Ranger to retreat to when he felt overwhelmed, and modifying the backyard to accommodate his exercise needs during recovery. "He'll need these medications twice daily," Ben explained, showing Sarah the carefully labeled pill containers. "And these exercises should be done every morning and evening to help rebuild his muscle tone." Sarah took notes diligently, aware of the responsibility she was assuming. "What about his interaction with Joey? Should we limit it?" Ben watched as Joey sat quietly on his playmat, reading a picture book while Ranger rested nearby, not touching but clearly aware of each other's presence. "Normally, I'd advise carefully supervised, limited contact between a child this young and a dog with Ranger's history," Ben admitted. "But in this case, I think they understand each other in ways we don't. Just never leave them completely alone together, especially in these early days." After reviewing all the care instructions and helping set up Ranger's medication schedule, Ben prepared to leave. Sarah walked him to his car. "I can't thank you enough," she said, "for everything you've done for Ranger, for Joey, for all of us." Ben smiled, the fatigue of the past weeks evident in his eyes, but not diminishing their warmth. "This is why I became a vet. To see animals heal, to see them connect with people who truly care for them." "Will you?" Sarah hesitated. "Will you be checking in on Ranger regularly?" "Absolutely. I'll be back next week for his follow-up, sooner if you need anything." He paused, then added, "And maybe when Ranger's more settled, we could have dinner sometime to discuss his progress, of course." Sarah felt a surprising flutter in her chest. "I'd like that." As Ben drove away, Sarah turned back toward the house, struck by how different everything looked now. The same modest home on the same quiet street, but somehow transformed, filled with new purpose, new connections, new possibilities. Inside, she found Martha in the kitchen, preparing lunch, while keeping an eye on Joey and Ranger through the doorway. "Ben gone?" Martha asked, slicing apples for Joey's plate. "Yes, he'll be back next week for Ranger's checkup." Sarah moved to the window, looking out at Wisteria Lane. Several neighbors were visible. Ray watering his front garden, the Davidson brothers unloading supplies from their truck, Teresa chatting with Mrs. Henderson on the sidewalk, all of them glancing occasionally toward Martha's house, connected now by invisible threads of shared experience. "I never would have predicted any of this," Sarah murmured. 3 weeks ago, we barely knew these people. Now they're like family." Martha nodded thoughtfully. "Crisis reveals character. Sometimes it takes something extraordinary to break through the walls we build around ourselves." In the living room, Joey had fallen asleep on his playmat, his picture book still open beside him. Ranger, who had been resting on his special orthopedic bed nearby, carefully rose and moved closer to the sleeping child. With a deep sigh, he settled himself beside Joey, not touching but close enough that Joey would feel his presence. Sarah watched, transfixed by the simple beauty of their trust in each other. "Do you think Joey really understood what was happening, that Ranger was in trouble, needed help?" "I think," Martha said slowly, "that children, especially very young children, live closer to certain truths than adults do. They haven't yet learned to ignore their instincts, to dismiss what they can't explain." Joey sensed Ranger's suffering, and he responded with pure compassion, no hesitation, no calculation. "And somehow, Ranger knew that Joey was trying to help him," Sarah added. "Even in his most desperate moment, He recognized an ally. The doorbell rang, interrupting their reflection. Sarah opened it to find Mike and Teresa Ramirez standing on the porch, holding a large gift basket. "We thought we'd welcome the newest resident of Wisteria. Lane," Teresa explained, handing over the basket filled with dog toys, treats, and homemade dog biscuits. "Everyone pitched in," Mike added. "Ray made the bed platform. The Davidsons built the ramp for the back steps. Mrs. Henderson knitted that blanket." Sarah invited them in, touched by the community's continued support. As they entered the living room, they fell silent at the sight of Joey and Ranger resting peacefully together. "Will you look at that?" Teresa whispered, "like they've known each other forever." More neighbors arrived throughout the afternoon, each bringing small gifts or offerings of help. By evening, Martha's living room was filled with people who, just weeks ago, had been strangers united only by proximity. Now they shared stories, laughter, and a common purpose. As twilight settled over Wisteria Lane, Ben returned, having finished his hospital rounds. He joined the impromptu gathering, answering questions about Ranger's care and marveling at the dog's comfort level in his new environment. "I've worked with hundreds of rescue cases," he told the assembled neighbors. "Animals that have suffered terrible abuse often take months, even years, to trust humans again. But Ranger, it's like he knows he's exactly where he belongs." From his position on a blanket near the fireplace, Ranger watched the gathering with alert but calm eyes. Joey, now awake, sat beside him, occasionally whispering in the dog's ear as if sharing secrets only they could understand. Sarah found herself standing beside Ben, observing the scene from a slight distance. "It's amazing how much has changed," she said quietly. "Not just Ranger and Joey, but all of us." Ben nodded. "That's the power of compassion. It transforms everything it touches." As the evening deepened, neighbors began to say their goodbyes, each stopping to give Ranger a gentle word of encouragement and Joey a pat on the head. Soon, only the core group remained: Sarah, Martha, Ben, and the Ramirez family, who had become particularly close through the ordeal. Mike cleared his throat, looking slightly uncomfortable. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you all. Something I should have said sooner." The room quieted, all eyes turning to him. "That barrel in Martha's backyard, I knew it was there. Years ago, when old man Jenkins still owned this place, before Martha moved in, he asked me to help him bury it partway in the ground. Said he used it to collect rainwater for his garden." Mike's face flushed with shame. "I'd forgotten all about it until Joey found Ranger." Teresa placed a hand on her husband's arm, encouraging him to continue. "What I'm trying to say is, whoever put Ranger in that barrel, they must have known it was there, must have known the neighborhood, well enough to find it hidden in those weeds." He looked up, meeting Sarah's eyes directly. "I think it was someone local, maybe not from Wisteria Lane itself, but someone familiar with the area." Sarah felt a chill despite the warm evening. The police arrested the man with the blue pickup. They found evidence linking him to Ranger. "Yes," Mike acknowledged. "But these operations, they don't work alone. They have spotters, people who identify targets and locations, people who blend in." The implication hung heavy in the air. Someone in their wider community might have been involved, might still be, watching. "That's why we can't stop now," Teresa said firmly. "The neighborhood watch, the communication network, all of it. We have to stay vigilant, not just for Ranger, but for all the pets in the area." Ben nodded in agreement. "The police have disrupted one cell of this network, but these operations are resilient. They adapt, relocate, start again." "Then so will we," Martha declared, her voice stronger than her years might suggest. "We'll keep watching out for each other. We'll make sure what happened to Ranger doesn't happen to anyone else's pet." As if sensing he was the subject of conversation, Ranger lifted his head, his eyes moving from face to face around the room. Joey, with the intuitive understanding that had characterized their connection from the beginning, placed a small hand on the dog's shoulder, offering reassurance. "Safe." "Now," the child said clearly. "All safe." Sarah wasn't sure if Joey was speaking to Ranger or to the adults in the room, perhaps both, but something in her son's simple certainty calmed the unease that had begun to grow. Later, after everyone had gone and Joey was tucked into bed, Sarah sat on the back porch steps, Ranger lying beside her with his head resting on her leg. The night was peaceful, the security lights casting a gentle glow over the yard where everything had begun. The oil barrel was gone now, removed by police, as evidence, and replaced by a small garden that Martha had started planting, bright flowers and herbs that would eventually cover all traces of the darkness that had been there. Sarah stroked Ranger's head, feeling the soft fur beneath her fingers. "You're going to be okay," she told him softly. "We all are." Ranger sighed deeply, his body relaxing against her. In the quiet of the night, Sarah could almost believe he understood every word. From inside the house came the sound of Joey's voice through the baby monitor, not crying, but talking in his sleep as he sometimes did. "Ranger," he murmured, "my Ranger." Even separated by walls, the connection between child and dog remained unbroken. Sarah thought about what Martha had said about children living closer to certain truths. What truth had Joey recognized in Ranger? What had he seen that adults could not? Perhaps it was simply the recognition of another soul in need, a pure, uncomplicated compassion that transcended language, species, and experience, the kind of understanding that, in a more perfect world, would guide all human interactions. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Sarah woke to find Joey already up sitting beside Ranger's bed, showing the dog pictures from his favorite book. Ranger watched with patient attention, his tail thumping gently against the floor. "Morning, you two," Sarah said, smiling at the sight. Joey looked up, his face alight with joy. "Ranger better today, less hurt." Sarah knelt beside them, checking the bandages on Ranger's legs that still protected healing wounds. "He's getting better, sweetheart. A little more every day." "Because love," Joey said with the profound simplicity of childhood. Sarah blinked back sudden tears. "Yes, Joey, because of love." Later that morning, Ben arrived for Ranger's first home checkup. He examined the dog thoroughly, nodding with satisfaction at his progress. "His recovery is exceptional," Ben told Sarah as they sat at the kitchen table, reviewing Ranger's treatment plan. "Physically, he's healing faster than I anticipated. And emotionally, well, I've never seen an abused animal adapt to a new environment so quickly." Through the window, they could see Martha in the backyard, supervising as Joey gently rolled a soft ball for Ranger to follow with his eyes, an exercise Ben had recommended to help the dog regain focus and confidence. "It's Joey," Sarah said. "Somehow he knows exactly what Ranger needs, how to be around him, when to give him space, when to offer comfort." Ben watched them thoughtfully. In veterinary medicine, we're taught to evaluate animals based on observable symptoms and behaviors. But there's so much we don't understand about how they perceive the world, how they communicate with each other, and sometimes with us. Do you think that's what happened? Joey and Ranger communicating on some level we can't perceive? "I think," Ben said carefully, "that your son recognized a soul in distress and responded with pure empathy, and Ranger, even in his most traumatized state, recognized that empathy and held onto it like a lifeline." Outside, Joey had settled on the grass beside Ranger, talking softly to the dog while showing him something he'd found. a small yellow flower that had pushed its way through a crack in the patio. "Life finds a way," Ben murmured, watching them, "even in the most unlikely circumstances." As summer gave way to fall, Wisteria Lane continued its transformation. The Neighborhood Watch program expanded into community improvement projects. The Davidson brothers organized a cleanup of the local park. Mike and Teresa started a pet safety workshop at the community center. Ray Thompson, to everyone's surprise, began teaching local children how to care for and understand animals. And at the center of it all, though few outside the neighborhood knew it, was the remarkable bond between a small boy and the dog he had saved, a connection that had rippled outward, breaking down walls and building bridges where none had existed before. 6 months after Ranger's rescue, on a crisp October afternoon, the residents of Wisteria Lane gathered in Martha's backyard for a celebration. A banner strung between 2 trees read, "Ranger's Rebirth Day," in bright childish letters. Joey had insisted on painting it himself, with some help from Teresa. Ranger, now fully recovered and restored to his proper weight, moved confidently among the guests, accepting gentle pets and occasionally returning to Joey's side, as if checking in with his young guardian. Ben, who had become a regular presence in their lives, and increasingly in Sarah's heart, brought a special dog-friendly cake for the occasion. As everyone sang a modified version of Happy Birthday, Ranger sat beside Joey, tail wagging steadily, eyes bright with what could only be described as contentment. "I have an announcement," Ben said when the singing concluded. "The case against the individuals who harmed Ranger has been completed. All 3 men involved have pleaded guilty. They'll be serving significant sentences, and more importantly, they've provided information that has helped break up 2 more operations in neighboring counties." A cheer went up from the gathered neighbors. Martha wiped tears from her eyes. Sarah knelt beside Joey, who was hugging Ranger gently around the neck. "Do you understand what Ben is saying, sweetie? The bad men who hurt Ranger can't hurt any more animals." Joey nodded solemnly. "No more barrels," he said. Then, with a wisdom that continually astonished Sarah, he added, "But still watch, still protect." "That's right," Sarah agreed, wondering, not for the first time at her son's understanding. We still need to watch out for each other. As the party continued around them, Sarah found herself standing beside Martha, near the spot where the oil barrel had once stood. Now a small garden bloomed there, marigolds, petunias, and hardy mums, creating a riot of color that showed no trace of the darkness that had preceded them. "I still think about it sometimes," Martha admitted quietly. "What if Joey hadn't wandered over here that day? What if he hadn't heard Ranger?" Sarah watched her son, now running carefully alongside Ranger in a game that only they understood, their movements somehow synchronized despite their differences. "I think," she said slowly, "that maybe it wasn't chance at all. Maybe Joey was always meant to find Ranger. Maybe they were always meant to find each other." Martha nodded, her eyes following the pair as they circled the yard. "And maybe they were meant to find all of us too, to remind us what community really means." As the afternoon light softened into evening, the neighbors of Wisteria Lane, once strangers, now a family of choice, gathered for a photograph beneath the banner. Joey sat in the center, Ranger beside him, both surrounded by the people whose lives had been transformed by their unlikely connection. In that moment, captured forever in pixels and print, the circle was complete. A forgotten dog, a perceptive child, and a community reborn through the simplest yet most powerful of human capacities, the ability to recognize suffering and respond with compassion. And as the camera flashed, freezing the moment in time, Joey wrapped his arm around Ranger's neck and whispered something in the dog's ear, a secret between them, A promise, perhaps, or simply an acknowledgement of the invisible thread that had drawn them together across darkness and into light. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Joey and Ranger has touched your hearts as deeply as it touched ours. Their journey reminds us that sometimes the most profound connections come from the most unexpected circumstances, and that compassion has the power to transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing to our channel and giving this video a thumbs up. We create these emotional narratives daily, each one exploring the remarkable capacity of humans and animals to heal each other. Don't miss our upcoming stories by enabling notifications. And please share your own experiences of unlikely connections in the comments below. Your stories inspire us to continue bringing these powerful narratives to life. Until next time, remember that sometimes the smallest hands can create the biggest changes.